Sartre uses notions of bad faith and spirit of seriousness to name two different defense strategies used by individuals to ease the tension of responsibility. In bad faith, a person believes that she is just performing a role given to her and she has no other choice. For example, I act like an achiever, an explorer, a socializer, or a killer because this is who I am. And while in spirit of seriousness, she believes that her choices are justified by features of the world. For example, I am the explorer because the world is so interesting. In life, both strategies are used to conceal the fact that human beings are free. They are described by Sartre as misleading and harmful beliefs about an individual's position in the world and about source of meaning of her actions. However, introduced into game analysis, I think that they can provide an interesting ontological framework for relationship between the self-avatar and the game world. My argument, however, is limited to games which are neither playable artifacts nor AAA productions, namely to adventure games that can't be won or lost, just be finished. And I will make my argument and let it by example of Vanishing of Ethan Carter by the astronauts. My presentation will contain some late spoilers, but I will show only necessary fragments. I'll limit my examples to the beginning of the game. So why do I claim that meaning of in-game activities is rooted in bad faith and spirit of seriousness? How the meaning given to game actions differs from those performed in life when considering characteristics of an individual, a world, and facticity, which is, according to Sartre, individual's position in the world of determining her point of view. To answer such questions, I compare bad faith and spirit of seriousness in situations of life and a game. Focusing on an ontology of a gameplay situation, I do not propose a framework for game research, but explore a position of logic subject inside a game. The gameplay situation as one of the possible situations that can arise between a human being and a game outlines a relationship between an avatar experienced as self, it is self-avatar, to the meaningful game world. I explore the ways in which the gameplay situation differs from the life situation, that is, the relationship between a human being and her everyday world. Firstly, I need to mark a condition and features of an individual's position in the world she perceives. I will outline how, according to Sartre, meaning is created in a life situation, and ways it depends on an overall existential project of an individual and her attitude to the game world. Then I will apply underlying assumption of his ontology to a gameplay situation, to explore how such meaning relies on the position of a self-avatar and her attitude to the game world. What does the process of meaning-making entail for human beings? In the existential philosophy of Sartre, the world lacks meaning, and therefore the world is not able to support meanings of an individual gives to their life. Not only is she completely free to start the process of meaning-making, but is also completely responsible for who she is and how she acts. It is a matter of the particular existential project, whereby every individual meaning-making is grounded in freedom. Sartrean understanding of freedom is far from the everyday use of the term. Freedom is not understood here as a possibility of choosing between options presented. For example, I decide to become an actress, a diver, or a philosopher. Freedom here is understood as a relation to the given, namely as a possibility of negation. Sartrean freedom turns out to be the fundamental characteristics of a human being, as it describes an attitude of an existential project of the human being to the world. Human being is nothingness, and it cannot cease to be free, so no free decision is able to change it. Therefore, a human being does not have any essence. It is a project, never-ending longing for something it was in the past or wants to become. While an individual is nothingness, a chasm in being, which is able to freely interact with the world because of its otherness. The world is indifferent fullness and being. Therefore, it is not possible to answer the question, what is the meaning of this tree, without reference to the particular human being. Because the meaning of this tree as a source of inspiration or a firewood depends on project one connects with this tree. Hence, this is freedom, what constitutes meaning of the world, intentions, actions, and their interpretation. Nevertheless, the free consciousness always finds herself within the indifferent world, as being thrown into a particular situation she is facing from the particular point of view, as this involvement of the particular consciousness is facticity. By setting individuals' relationship to the world, facticity does not take away the burden of freedom. Even if the conventional deed is experienced as motivated and imposed upon by demands of the particular situation, it needs to be freely chosen by an individual as her own way of acting. Therefore, any act becomes justified just by itself. It doesn't become better, worse, innocent, or meaningless. Moreover, an individual cannot cease to take full responsibility for this act. In short, understanding of individuals' own unconditioned nothingness and inescapable freedom is then the only source of deep and authentic sense of meaning. Additionally, being aware of this freedom causes anguish, as nobody and nothing is given as just meaningful. In consequence, as Sartre writes in a novel Road to Freedom, I quote this, everyone runs away. Schwarz veers away, Nippers slips, and Pinette goes mad. Each of them quickly doctored for himself an attitude that will help him to survive. All of these life-giving meanings derive from bad faith. They are believed in for their calming effect. The hardship of bearing responsibility for freedom is the reason for a common presence of defense mechanisms, bad faith and spirit of seriousness. They conceal freedom and anguish and help individuals to perceive their actions as well as the surrounding world as justified and meaningful. Do the defense mechanism of bad faith and spirit of seriousness works also while playing a game? Building on Sartrean ontology of the human condition, I will make an attempt to outline a condition of a self-avatar in adventure games characterized by an absence of a condition of losing a game. Firstly, I would like to point out the differences between Sartrean world, into which human beings are thrown, and the game world. And now I will focus on Vanishing of Ethan Carter by the Astronauts, the adventure game with a first-person perspective and no losing condition. I would like to limit the application of the Sartrean ontology to this kind of games. The game, before I run it, is for me just an object in the world. I am free in relation to it. I can turn it out or not. When I make a decision and start the game, I feel that an adventure begins. The place I can observe looks realistic. When I turn back my avatar, I notice an entrance to the tunnel, and led by curiosity, I obviously run inside. I run in the darkness to find myself back in the same place. This is the three-dimensional landscape that closely resembles Karkonosze, mountains in Poland. But the game introduces me to a different facticity, a new facticity where mystery is lurking from behind the trees, and abandoned buildings are inhabited by dark forces, and murder weapons, when arranged in proper places, turn back time, allowing me to see crucial stop-motion scenes from the crime. If it were a live situation, I would have to make a free decision in what to do. But I think that a gameplay situation provides an escape from the necessity of taking responsibility for an individual's actions and choices. Adventure games could then fulfill the longing for doubtlessness, which is one of the basic human needs from the point of view of Sartrean existentialism. In a gameplay situation, I quote, "Each of my choices, every act of intentional direction toward the world is morally and ontologically well-grounded. It has vital justification coming from outside. Therefore, all the relationships, self-world, self-things, meanings, values, senses are not created by my freedom, but are given to me as already established order." This is the definition of the spirit of seriousness, that is, the defense strategy used by people overburdened by responsibility caused by their freedom. The spirit of seriousness supports an individual's belief that the meaning of life can be derived from or even inscribed into the world. It leads to a conclusion that rules and meaning observed and experienced in the world only because of their presence defines and justifies individuals' endeavors. In life situation, according to Sartre, an individual and the world are on opposite poles. They are as different as possible. The consciousness or human freedom tries to conceal this fact. In order to feel safer, she tries to humanize the world, to make it both understandable and meaningful. This is why everything that is given, such as socially and culturally set meanings, are usually perceived as natural things. I think that a gameplay situation does not constitute such poles. There is nothing absurd and there is no freedom, as they stay behind the scope of the gameplay situation. Then, the moment I make the decision of turning the game on becomes the moment when I enter the self-avatar's facticity in the game world. Every player will find herself in this facticity and her situation will be determined by it. She will find the set of in-game meanings with no relation to her individual freedom, but related to self-avatar instead. Interpretation of this new facticity depends, obviously, on knowledge and interpretative skills of the player. The game sustains an experience of the self-avatar as being waited for by all the tasks placed along his way. The game supports a sense of meaning and purpose of actions I take, as a proper performance is rewarded and intuitive within the predetermined role. Moreover, it sustains the conviction that the obstacles offered by the game world are mute demands, designed to mirror abilities of the self-avatar. And in fact, they are. I think that a gameplay situation creates obstacles which limit a player's freedom, as they set the limit for her own meaning-making. This is the consequence of the kernel of the gameplay situation, where the absurd game world is not hidden beneath the spirit of seriousness of the player. There is no absurd and indifferent world in the game. The game world is purposeful and responsive. It changes accordingly to players' actions, and its meaning is pre-designed and inscribed into it, and can be perceived only as factual while taking a position of the self-avatar. Even if an experienced meaning of a particular moment is limited to some kind of atmosphere, all the game world is here to create this ambience. While playing Vanishing of Ethan Carter, I follow paths designed to lead me to places I should visit. I keep finding, by sheer coincidence, half-burned newspapers containing crucial information. For example, this on a table in an abandoned house, pieces of paper are placed, filled with childish handwriting. The short story illustrates the mystery I just try to understand. And in Vanishing of Ethan Carter also presents more innovative ways to support my spirit of seriousness. Instead of being informed about actions I should perform, I am led by suggestions in the form of text questions, appearing in the air when I am getting closer to an important object. For example, like just close to the beginning of the game, I am getting closer to a railway car. And I see questions, just as if questions a detective should ask himself were hidden in the investigated object in this hyperreal world. Questions do not destroy the impression or the meaning hidden in the object itself, as they do not refer to a story which happened in the past, but to perceivable signs of the crime and to my current position toward this object. And last but not least, the most interesting facet of Vanishing of Ethan Carter's world are flashbacks from the past. They are depicted and resonant in the different layers of the in-game world, as awaiting me to reveal them. They allow me to watch the events of the crime scene when I manage to collect and put together all the necessary objects and touch the body of the victim. Flashbacks are visions caused by the special gift of the self-avatar that uncovers mysterious meanings hidden in this game world. So, contrary to life, the game provides an explanation of actions I need to take. It imposes onto me a meaning of the situation into which I am thrown as a self-avatar. While playing, I feel that the world makes me do what I do, so I act in spirit of seriousness. Who then is the actor of the in-game endeavors on whom these actions are imposed on and whose actions are justified? In the everyday world, a source of meaning of an existential project is always a human being. Individual meaning-making is then performed from inside, even if the justification of one's actions is erroneously ascribed to the world. A human being in the world never achieves its final shape and cannot aptly attribute to herself a kind of meaning that non-human objects and others have. Therefore, the need for meaning and personal destiny can never be justified without concealing freedom. This causes an anguish, a feeling of groundlessness that needs to be helped. I quote, "This desire to act like a mechanism driven by external causes, to become only and solely one single function, a trait, a role, is one of the forms of bad faith, or, in other words, one of the ways the human being escapes its freedom." The term bad faith designates here a conviction that one is determined by and limited to a performed role. Nevertheless, this self-constraint is not experienced as a role anymore. Bad faith is a form of a false and powerful self-identification of a free human being. It takes place when a human comes to believe that she is an object or mechanism that cannot be changed nor modified. People acting in bad faith are best illustrated by characters in Sartre's Road to Freedom again. Brunet, that has given up his freedom, he was just a soldier, or the barman, who was overly a barman. When approaching a gameplay situation, one has a choice, namely, not to enter a gameplay or to self-constrain and act as an avatar, that is, to play somebody one is not. Therefore, a bad faith can be explained not only as a description of a misperception of the human condition. In a gameplay situation, bad faith becomes ontological characteristics of self-avatar's condition. This point of view becomes a basis for meaning-making in a game. This supplies a framework of the gameplay situation with characteristics of an actor. As long as the player acts as a self-avatar, she does not experience a game as related to her own freedom. In consequence, the process of in-game meaning-making does not take place between an in-game facticity and freedom of the player, but is referred to an objectified role of the self-avatar the player identifies with. In Vanishing of Ethan Carter, I perceive the game world from a first-person perspective. As a self-avatar, I find myself in the woods of an uncanny Red Creek Valley. I become a listener of my inner monologue.
Ethan Carter, I didn't know. But he knew who I was. But he knew who I was. When the police won't help you. When the police won't help you, and the priests don't believe you. You call on Paul Prospero. You call on me. You call on me.
So this is the voice of narrator, which becomes my inner thoughts while taking a role of self-avatar. It creates a synchronic commentary for the situation I am in, unfolds my in-game facticity. In the game, I take a role which is proposed to me. Until now, in relation to the gameplay, I consider myself just as a detective, looking for Ethan Carter, no matter how successful I am in my endeavors. So the barman, who is overly a barman, makes every gesture a barman's gesture, referring to his conviction of himself as a barman. His behavior is led by his bad faith, and its appropriateness is set by the facticity of being a barman. Analogically, the player thinking of herself as a self-avatar and acting as one is looking at the game world in bad faith, searching for what just a detective would search. Therefore, in a gameplay situation, my actions are performed in a context of a mission I execute, that is, in a context of the relevance to the project of the self-avatar, my adventure and destiny. In a life situation, a meaning of barman's gesture is falsified by his bad faith. He can at any moment gain an awareness that he is a free human being. He can potentially quit his job, cease connecting meaning of his actions with his role, and keep living his life. And contrarily, when the player quits the position of bad faith, the gameplay situation is disturbed. The avatar.
Marta, could you come to an end?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Just, summing up a bit. Okay, the world. Oh, okay. So, therefore, so to sum up, when I take a position of the self-avatar in bad faith, the game world becomes meaningful for me in the light of the project of my avatar. And the facticity of this world and priority of the avatar's project causes the world to be experienced in the spirit of seriousness as fulfilling expectations, meaningful and justifying my endeavors. Okay, thank you for attention. Sorry if it took too long.
No problem. We manage it. So, any questions about the spirit of seriousness and bad faith? Yeah?
Not exactly that, but the concept of freedom. Because, I mean, you are very consistently applying this Sartrean conception, which is fruitful in many contexts, but I think it counters the intuition most players have, in the sense that you are free in a certain sense. In one of the senses is that you are free to choose. I mean, you can select strategies within the game, in the gameplay, as you said. So, in order to capture some kind of freedom, you should maybe loosen up that Sartrean conception a little bit, not necessarily within the framework of Sartre's philosophy, but I mean, you should kind of give a wider register of the conception of freedom. For instance, positive freedom eventually, I mean, the freedom to choose and to be self-determinating. For instance, whether you go into the game or not. Which is compatible with the Sartrean conception, but you also have the more negative freedom, it's coined. The term is coined by Berlin, as you may know. But anyway, the kind of freedom where you choose between strategies, between options, etc., both in real and in the gameplay. So. There are many others, but these are the first ones, and it might be more fruitful if you could follow some tracks on that freedom of choice, for instance, and compare that with these implications you draw from Sartre as a start, eventually. So I would nuance the freedom conception a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for a suggestion. I was trying to apply, as you said, just Sartrean conception, Sartrean ontology. That's why I use this very narrow understanding of freedom, just to be consistent with this field. As far as I think it can be useful for sketching this gameplay situation, like in here. But you're right, of course, that freedom. In different meanings than this, the very special Sartrean one is perhaps more appropriate to interpretation of games.
More in accord with the intuition of the player.
Yes, that's right. That's why I try to explain exactly what the Sartrean freedom, how it's understood by Sartre. Yeah, so that's why I explained.
You mentioned in the interesting presentation that you were talking about the avatar's facticity rather than the player's facticity. Could you elaborate on that decision, why we talk about avatar's facticity and not the human player's facticity?
I focus on self-avatar's facticity, the different facticity than the players, because I wanted to focus on the in-game situation, because as Daniel in yesterday's panel pointed out, that the player, when approaching a game, is acting like, in Sartrean terms, like a free human being, while entering a game is forced somehow to take a position of logic subject. So this is needs to self-constrain in somehow. And this logic subject is defined by situation it is in. So this is its placement, its situatedness, its facticity inside the game world. It can be, of course, considered from different point of view, but this exact perspective on the game world, which is set by logic subject, I call this different facticity.
Other questions, remarks, announcements? No? Okay.
Thank you so much for that interesting talk. My question is related to Ollie's, I think, a little bit. I think that you are analysing the player avatar, the self-avatar, as if, I guess as you might call a simulation of life in which the avatar is in the same situation as the player may be in the world. Are you, or have you considered, or was it a conscious decision to not treat the game world and therefore the player's relationship with the self-avatar as an artwork that raises questions, very similar questions of existential aesthetics, and not only the parallels between the real world and the game world, but rather that connection that is an aesthetic connection between the player as a person and the player as playing the avatar?
Mm-hmm. As far as I understand the question, is it about interpretation of game as more in relation to hold the game to the art than using or introducing this live game parallel, this metaphor? If I understand the question well, I think that of course it would be fruitful for this interpretation to add this kind of interpretation of game as art, but and I think it can be a continuation of this line of thinking, but I just put it behind the scope of this presentation. Thank you for suggestion.
Yeah, you're so quiet. Are there any questions? No. Okay. Thanks to all the participants of the discussion and to all of the speakers here. The program says that we have another break now, a coffee break for 15 minutes, and we will meet here in 15 minutes again. So enjoy the break. Thank you.